At the busiest corner of the city, the luxurious watch store named Chronos Elegance glows under the bright yellow lights, standing out amid the bustling crowd. Each watch, from classic to modern, is exquisitely displayed in secure glass cases, reflecting the light like sparkling diamonds. The air inside is filled with the scent of premium leather and subtle perfumes, evoking a sense of luxury and refinement. At the reception desk, Steve, the store manager, is conversing with a sales associate named Jack. Both are dressed in smart suits, emblematic of the style and class the store represents. "Jack, have you checked out the latest Grand Complications from Patek Philippe?" Steve asks, his voice unable to hide his excitement. It's a masterpiece, not just a watch, but a statement of art and craftsmanship. Jack nods, his gaze focused on a customer admiring that very watch. "Yes, I've seen it. It truly highlights the stature of its wearer, but not everyone can truly understand and appreciate such exquisite details." Leaning on the counter, Steve's eyes sweep across the store and pause on a man in jeans and a black jacket who enters. This man, Joe, with his casual appearance and baseball cap, stands in stark contrast to the usual clientele. As Joe approaches the display of the latest watches, he stops in front of an expensive one with a glittering sapphire crystal face. Steve and Jack exchange a look, with a hint of skepticism from Steve. Steve approaches Joe with a half smile, his tone polite yet evaluative. "Welcome to Chronos Elegance. How can I assist you today?" Joe points to the watch in the display case. "I'd like to know more about this one. It seems quite special." Steve glances at the watch Joe is indicating, then sizes him up from head to toe, his eyes flashing with calculation. "This piece, it's one of our limited editions, truly very special, and of course, quite pricey. Perhaps I should show you some other models that might be more suitable." Joe catches Steve's hesitation and smiles. "No, I want to know about this one. Why is it special?" Taking a deep breath, Steve begins to explain with a more serious demeanor, yet still incredulous that the man before him could genuinely be interested in one of the most expensive watches in the store. "This watch is one of the finest pieces from a renowned brand," Steve starts, his tone becoming more solemn. "It is entirely handcrafted by top Swiss watchmakers. The face is made of natural mother-of-pearl, and every tiny detail showcases the high precision and craftsmanship." Steve then moves on to the strap. The strap is made from specially treated imported crocodile leather, enhancing its durability and providing a luxurious, elegant look for the wearer. The clasp is crafted from solid gold, intricate and sturdy, ensuring the watch remains securely on the wrist. As Steve approached the topic of price, he hesitated slightly. His gaze lingering on Joe, one could feel the judgment in every slow blink of his eyes, as if trying to determine whether Joe truly was a potential buyer for this expensive watch. After a moment's hesitation, Steve finally said, "This watch is priced at $250,000. It is one of our limited editions, extremely costly. Honestly, this might not be what you're looking for." Joe felt a flicker of irritation stir within him as he listened to Steve. Although he had braced himself for potential discrimination, facing it directly still led to disappointment. He shook his head slightly, his eyes lighting up with resolute determination. "Steve," Joe spoke calmly, his voice serious yet polite, "I understand this is one of the most expensive watches in your store, and its price doesn't surprise me. I didn't come here out of ignorance about watches or an inability to afford them. I came because I recognize the real value of these timepieces, and I appreciate the artistry involved in crafting them." Steve straightened up, crossing his arms defensively in front of his chest. "We just want to make sure our customers know what they are buying. That means we limit the trial of expensive items to those who are seriously interested." Steve's tone carried a hint of condescension, as if he couldn't believe Joe had the financial means or the knowledge to truly appreciate the item he was admiring. As Steve finished speaking, the doorbell chimed, signaling another customer's entry. Immediately, Steve's demeanor brightened as he spotted the newcomer, a middle-aged man dressed in a finely tailored designer suit, his wrist adorned with a gleaming Patek Philippe. The man carried himself with a confident, slow but authoritative stride. This was the type of customer Steve preferred to serve, those who didn't need to ask the price before purchasing. Steve instantly beamed a radiant smile, a stark contrast to the sarcastic and wary attitude he had shown Joe. He turned to look at a young female employee standing at the cash register. "Annie!" Steve called out, his tone directive, nodding towards Joe as if he were a burden that needed to be shifted immediately. "Take care of this customer, but make it quick," he whispered, low enough so only Annie could hear. "Don't let him linger or cause any trouble. I don't want any incidents to affect our customers." Steve gave Joe one last glance, his eyes cold and wary, as if reminding Annie to be extremely cautious. "Just keep him busy in a corner. If needed, introduce him to some of the simpler models. Don't let him get too close to the expensive items," Steve added, his tone tinged with sarcasm and implication. Annie bit her lip, uncomfortable with Steve's discriminatory instructions, but she merely nodded slightly. She understood that Steve was deliberately condescending towards Joe because of his casual appearance, and she knew she had little choice but to comply. "Understood," she replied quickly, her eyes still following the affluent customer Steve was approaching, whose smile turned friendly and warm as soon as he met the man in the designer's suit. As Steve walked away, Annie turned back to Joe, trying to maintain professionalism despite feeling tense. "Can I help you with this watch?" she asked, her smile polite but strained, clearly influenced by Steve's directives. Joe didn't miss any detail of this exchange. He had seen enough. Steve's blatant bias, Annie's reluctance, and how differently the store treated customers based solely on their appearance. Joe kept a composed face, but inside, disappointment and determination simmered. He decided that things here couldn't continue like this any longer. "It's okay, Annie. I can't afford this watch," Joe said gently, not wanting to add to the young woman's stress. "Could I perhaps see some of the less expensive ones?" "Yes, of course," she responded, trying to appear more friendly. "I'll show you some other models that are more affordable. Follow me, please." Joe nodded lightly and followed Annie past other display counters. Along the way, he could still feel Steve occasionally glancing over from a distance. Steve stood with the affluent customer, his smile broad and his demeanor entirely different from when he interacted with Joe. Annie led Joe to a nearby display counter where less complicated but still high-brand watches were showcased. She maintained a professional smile. "These are some of the more affordably priced models, yet they are still very elegant," she said, skillfully presenting a watch with a refined design. Annie gently placed the watch on the counter in front of Joe. "This one," she said, "is from Vacheron Constantine's limited collection. It's priced at $200,000. Joe looked down at the watch and chuckled under his breath. $200,000 is more affordable. He admired the craftsmanship in every detail. The watch featured a crocodile leather strap, a sapphire crystal face, and a case made from white gold. Inside, the intricate automatic movement ran smoothly, with the seconds hand gliding softly over the dial. Annie quickly nodded, sensing the irony in Joe's question. "Yes, that's right. For the high-end watches we carry, this is actually one of the more reasonably priced models compared to others we have on display here," she explained, clearly trying to do her job well. Joe pointed towards another watch in the display case, which featured even more elaborate design. The dial was made of iridescent mother-of-pearl, with delicate gold-plated hands, and the case was crafted from white gold. The hand-stitched crocodile leather strap showed meticulous attention to detail. The watch exuded a timeless elegance, a true symbol of class. "What about this one?" Joe asked, his tone both polite and curious. Annie glanced quickly at the watch and hesitated. "This one is from a limited collection by Patek Philippe," she explained cautiously. "It's priced at $190,000. Joe smiled lightly but was inwardly amused by the more affordable description Annie had used. $190,000, he repeated. "Not cheap, but I suppose it could be seen as more affordable." Annie gave a forced smile, her eyes flicking towards Steve, who was seeing the affluent customer out. Joe turned back to Annie, his gaze direct. "May I try this one on?" he asked, his manner polite yet firm. Annie hesitated. According to store policy, we usually only allow customers to try on watches when—" She trailed off, her anxious gaze darting towards Steve. Joe quickly picked up on her reluctance. He gently interjected to ease her discomfort. "When it looks like the customer can afford it, right?" Annie blushed, unable to deny the unspoken truth. "It's not like that," she replied softly, visibly flustered. Joe smiled gently, but his eyes showed firm resolve. "It's okay, Annie. If you're not allowed, just tell me. His tone was calm but uncompromising. Looking around briefly, Annie took a deep breath and made a decision. "You may try it on," she said, striving to maintain professionalism despite knowing Steve might disapprove. She carefully took the watch out of the display case and handed it to Joe. "This is a very special model," she said. "I'm sure it will fit you perfectly." Joe slipped the watch onto his wrist, feeling its perfect fit immediately. The watch clung to his wrist, shining under the light, its every refined detail affirming the class it embodied. "Perfect," Joe murmured, not hiding his satisfaction. He raised his wrist, observing the watch for a few seconds, then looked back at Annie with a gentle smile. "Thank you, it's really beautiful, but I think I need to think it over." Annie nodded subtly, understanding this was a polite way for customers to decline without offending the staff. Steve quickly approached, his expression mixing irony and disdain. Despite maintaining a professional smile, Steve's eyes couldn't hide his scorn for Joe. "How do you find the watch?" Steve asked, his tone sly but dripping with insinuation. "It must feel interesting to wear something so exquisite, right?" He crossed his arms, his smile curling. "But, of course, watches like this usually make one think carefully before making a decision." Joe stared straight at Steve, his gaze calm and unflinching in the face of the provocation. "Indeed," Joe responded softly. "With an item of such value, careful consideration is always necessary." Steve smirked, as though he had anticipated the answer. He nodded towards the display case with a half-joking, half-serious air. "I understand. Not everyone is ready to spend $190,000 on the spot. But we have other models, more suitable for those who just want to try without the real intent to buy." Joe clearly felt the sarcasm in Steve's words. It was not just a subtle suggestion to leave, but also an emphasis that he was not welcome here if he was not a serious buyer. Annie stood by, quietly bowing her head, clearly uncomfortable with Steve's demeanor. She wanted to say something, but hesitated in the face of the manager's authority. Joe tightened his jaw to remain composed, yet his gaze stayed locked on the self-satisfied manager before him. "So," Joe said slowly, articulating each word clearly, "you keep valuable items away from people you think can't afford them?" Steve's lips twisted into a more pronounced smirk. The polite mask had now completely slipped, revealing his true attitude. "Our regular customers know what they can and cannot afford," Steve replied, his voice tinged with mockery. "We cater to those who understand value, those who can really afford it." He gestured towards the exit. "You might want to look at other options around this area. No need to waste time on things beyond your reach." Joe tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving Steve, his look calm but sharp. "You don't know my limits," he replied, his tone soft but firm. "And assuming you do based on my appearance, that's no way to do business." Steve crossed his arms in front of his chest, his body tensing, his expression showing irritation and defensiveness. "We have an image to maintain," he said, lowering his voice, each word emphasized as though speaking to someone unreasonable. "We can't let just anyone come in here and touch our expensive items. It's about protecting the brand." Joe exhaled slowly, containing the anger rising within him. "Protecting the brand?" he repeated mockingly. "By judging customers based on their appearance? You think that's how you build loyalty and respect?" Steve shrugged, the smug smile still on his face. "Our clients appreciate the exclusivity," he said, his tone dismissive. "They don't want just anyone walking in here and handling everything. It's about the experience, about what makes us different." Joe raised his eyebrows, his gaze sharp as a knife. "And you think treating potential customers with disrespect is part of that experience?" Steve curled his lip, a look of arrogance clear on his face. "I know my customers better than you," he retorted tersely. "My job is to protect the integrity of the store." Joe clenched his fist slightly, but kept his voice steady. "You may not need to explain to me," he said softly, each word laden with implication, "but you will have to answer to someone. This approach is not only bad for business, it's also wrong." Steve momentarily lost his composure, his eyes flashing with a hint of panic before regaining his rigid demeanor. He crossed his arms tighter, as if to assert his authority. "If you don't like our methods," Steve said disdainfully, "you're free to leave. There are plenty of other stores that might suit your taste better." Joe looked straight into Steve's eyes, a faint smile on his lips that did not hide his resolve. "Thanks for the advice, Steve," he replied slowly. "But next time, I won't just be a visitor." Before Steve could respond, Joe turned to Annie, offering her a polite smile. "Thank you, Annie. You've been very helpful and professional." Annie nodded slightly, relieved by Joe's composure. Joe walked out of the store slowly, but before leaving, he turned to give Steve one last look. His eyes were cold, carrying a silent warning. "Have a good day, Steve. I'll be seeing you soon." Steve froze for a second, sensing something unsettling in that farewell, but he couldn't ponder it deeply. He shrugged it off and returned to his tasks, satisfied with himself for having smoothly handled an unsuitable customer. Joe stepped out of the store, the doorbell chiming softly behind him. He took a deep breath, feeling the slight chill of the outside air, and realized that what he had just experienced was not a mere isolated incident. It was a clear manifestation of a deeply flawed mindset. The next morning, the atmosphere in the store was unusually tense. News from the headquarters that a branch development director would personally visit had the staff buzzing. It was the first time such an event was happening at the store, and everyone was abuzz with speculation. Steve walked into the store early as usual, confident as ever. His suit was perfectly pressed, his leather shoes shining under the lights. He moved with an authoritative air, his head held high, as if the director's visit could hardly concern him. For Steve, it was merely an opportunity to demonstrate his superiority and reinforce his position. "This must be to evaluate our performance," Steve thought smugly, a self-satisfied smile appearing on his face. He had run the store strictly, everything under his absolute control. Nothing could shake him. The staff gathered in small groups, working while exchanging anxious whispers. "I heard this director is quite strict," one employee whispered to a colleague, unable to hide his nervousness. "Yeah, I don't think he'll be pleased with any minor faults," another responded, glancing at Steve. But Steve, standing in the center of the store, had the situation completely under control. He clapped his hands lightly to draw everyone's attention, his sharp gaze sweeping over each employee. "Listen up," he commanded, his voice firm. "We've done our job well, and today is no exception. Just continue as usual. There's nothing to worry about." He walked past each display counter, checking the final details with calm and focus. Everything was in its place. The watches were polished to a shine, the glass counters spotless. Steve reassured himself that this would just be a brief meetup, a chance for the director to see the professionalism he had built. "This time I'll make a strong impression," he thought, adjusting his collar while confidently smiling. He believed that under his management the store could show no faults. His reputation and competence would be further solidified after this inspection. Annie, standing near the cashier, watched Steve warily. The incident with Joe from the previous day was still fresh in her mind. Joe's insinuating remarks about change gave her a premonition that today would not be an ordinary meeting. However, Steve seemed completely oblivious to this. He was utterly confident in his abilities and the way he managed the store. Steve glanced at his wristwatch. The time for the meeting with the director was drawing near. He smiled again, confident that everything would proceed as planned. In his eyes, this was an opportunity to assert his position and managerial skills, not a day to worry. The doorbell chimed softly, and Steve looked up, his confident smile still in place. He adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and prepared for the meeting he was sure would solidify his standing. As Steve walked toward the door, he suddenly stopped. Joe entered, dressed in the same simple attire as the day before, a plain black jacket, jeans, and sneakers. But this time, he was not alone. Accompanying Joe was an elegantly dressed woman in a gray business suit, Lisa, a personal assistant from the headquarters. She walked with a calm but authoritative air, holding a stack of documents in her hand. Steve's smile quickly vanished, replaced by a look of confusion. He couldn't believe his eyes. "Why is he here?" Steve thought rapidly, but he quickly regained his composure and put on a professional smile as if he had anticipated this. "Hello," Steve said, trying to sound natural despite feeling slightly bewildered. "Great to see you again." "Ah, I didn't expect you today." Joe returned to the smile, a calm but sharp grin that made Steve uncomfortable. "I'm not just passing by, Steve," Joe said slowly, never taking his eyes off the manager. I'm here for an important meeting. Steve raised an eyebrow, his expression dubious. An important meeting. He quickly glanced at Lisa, scanning her, then turned back to Joe. What do you mean? Lisa stepped forward, her gaze steady but piercing. Steve, let me introduce, she said, her tone professional yet firm. This is Joe Bennett, the branch development director and the owner of this chain of stores. For a moment, Steve's face froze. He stood still, as if hit by a cold shock. His confidence faded, giving way to shock and confusion visible on his face. The owner? Steve stammered, disbelief ringing in his ears. He stared at Joe, the man he had underestimated and tried to subtly dismiss the day before. Joe maintained a gentle smile on his lips, his eyes showing calm resolve. We need to talk, Steve, he said. His voice was soft, yet carried an undeniable authority, much like someone who had taken complete control of the situation. Steve felt the room tighten around him. The sarcastic remarks and disdainful attitude he had shown Joe the previous day now seemed like traps closing in. He struggled to regain his composure, but his sense of control was slipping away. Lisa's gaze was icy as she looked at Steve. Is the meeting room ready? She asked, her face showing no emotion. Her manner was decisive, giving Steve no room to refuse. Joe nodded at Lisa, maintaining his focus. Then, he turned to Steve, his look full of implication and challenge. Let's go, Steve, he said. We have a lot to discuss. Steve swallowed hard, feeling as though an undercurrent was sweeping away his self-assuredness. The dismissiveness and condescension he had displayed toward Joe now weighed heavily on him. He had no choice but to follow Joe and Lisa to the private meeting room. Each step felt like a blow to his pride. This time, Steve knew. Everything he thought he controlled was falling into chaos, and this meeting would be unlike any he had ever experienced. The atmosphere in the meeting room promised to be dense and tense, and Steve felt like an outsider in his own store that he had proudly managed. As they entered the meeting room, the warm yellow lights shone, but the air was as cold as ice. Joe and Lisa sat down at the table, while Steve stood somewhat awkwardly on the other side. He felt as if he were being interrogated, not only by their positioning, but also by Lisa's cold gaze and Joe's resolute eyes. We need to discuss how the store is operated and how customers are treated, Joe began, his voice serious and confident. I've heard about the issues some customers have encountered, and I've experienced it myself. I cannot accept the way you're running things. Steve opened his mouth to object, but couldn't find the words. His breathing became heavy, as if all his words were stuck in his throat. Instead of responding, he just stood there, feeling the stiffness in each passing second. Lisa turned to Steve, her expression emotionless. We will not tolerate any discriminatory behavior in the store. Building a brand isn't just about the product, but also about how we treat our customers. Joe nodded in agreement. And importantly, Steve, your actions affect not just the brand, but everyone working in this store. We need an environment where everyone feels welcome and respected. Steve felt like a storm was approaching, each word cutting like a sharp knife. He looked into the eyes of Joe and Lisa, realizing he had completely misjudged the situation. Steve started, but the words just wouldn't come out, only the overwhelming silence. Steve stood still for a moment, feeling all eyes on him, as if the pressure of the confrontation was weighing down on his shoulders. Finally, the silence was broken by a faint sound from his lips. I'm sorry, Steve said, his voice shaky, no longer filled with his usual confidence. A wave of regret and helplessness washed over him, forcing him to confront what he had said and done. I apologize for the way I've behaved and how I've judged you, Steve continued, his eyes scanning the faces of Joe and Lisa, seeking understanding. I realize that I was wrong to let prejudice dictate my approach to customers. Seeing things based solely on appearances is not only a mistake in business practices, but also a failure to reflect the core values we should uphold. Steve sighed, feeling the weight of regret heavy on his chest. I promise to change. I won't just stop at words. I'll work to improve how we serve our customers, from listening more to creating an environment where everyone feels welcomed. I understand that a strong brand isn't just built on good products, but also on how we treat our customers. Joe looked at him, his gaze firm. Steve, he said gently, I appreciate your self-awareness and your promises. However, there's something I need to make clear. Steve looked into Joe's eyes, sensing something amiss. "What is it?" he asked, a sense of unease rising within him. Joe took a deep breath, not wanting to use harsh words, but unable to avoid the necessary sternness. "We've discussed the problems you've caused, the attitude and behavior that don't align with the brand's values. No matter your promises, your previous actions have left a lasting negative impression." Steve felt the blood rushing to his face, a pervasive fear spreading within him. "What do you mean?" "Steve," Lisa said sternly, "we cannot accept the behaviors that have occurred in the store. This isn't just a personal issue, it's an issue that affects our entire team and our customers. It's time for us to take action." "No," Steve stammered, his eyes widening. "I said I would change. I can improve everything." Joe shook his head, unable to accept Steve's excuses. "It's too late to change, Steve. What has happened cannot be overlooked." Steve felt as if there was nowhere left to turn, as if the ground beneath him had crumbled. "But I've been here for so long. I can't be fired." He clung to hope, but deep down, he knew he was facing an inevitable reality. "The decision has been made," Joe said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Steve, I'm sorry, but today we are terminating your contract with this store." "Steve," Lisa added, her voice calm but firm, "this isn't a discussion. This is the final decision." Minutes later, when the staff was summoned, they entered one by one, their faces showing a mix of curiosity and concern. Once everyone was gathered, Joe stood up, scanning all the employees. "Thank you all for gathering quickly," Joe began, his voice firm and resonant. "I want you to know that today we have an important meeting concerning how we operate in this store." Steve stood on the other side of the room, sweat beginning to soak through his shirt. But he tried to maintain a calm exterior. He knew everyone was waiting to hear what would unfold. "As you know, we are continually striving to build a work environment where everyone feels welcomed and respected," Joe continued, his gaze fixed on Steve, emphasizing the issue that everyone had already recognized. "However, to achieve that, we need to address the current issues existing in how we serve our customers." "Steve," Joe turned to him, "there have been actions and attitudes in the store that we cannot accept. Today, we are terminating our contract with you." A heavy silence enveloped the room. Everyone's eyes turned towards Steve. They were stunned by the news. Steve felt as if hundreds of scrutinizing eyes were judging him, feeling tried in the very space he had managed. "We will start anew from here," Joe said, trying to create a positive atmosphere amid the significant change. "I want all of you to understand that this isn't just a decision about Steve as an individual, but the first step towards building a better future for our store." And Joe turned to Steve, his expression resolute. "Steve, you are no longer an employee here. You may leave now. Lisa has prepared all the paperwork for you." Steve, overwhelmed with anger, could not stand Joe's calm confidence. "You'll regret this decision," he exclaimed, his voice tense. "I've spent years building up this store. You know nothing about managing and running it." Joe stood his ground. "I'm not one to have regrets, Steve. I'm looking forward to the future." Steve clenched his fists, anger overshadowing his reason. "You'll see, Joe. What I've done was necessary to protect this brand. You can't change everything overnight." Joe looked straight into Steve's eyes, unflinching. "A strong brand is built on respect and loyalty. If you can't understand that, then it's best you leave." The room fell silent, every gaze fixed on the two of them. "This isn't over," Steve said, his tone still haughty but now somewhat diminished. "I'll show everyone that they made the wrong choice." Joe simply nodded. "That's your choice, Steve. But I hope you will reflect on what you've said and done." Steve turned away, feeling the rage boiling inside. But deep down, he knew he no longer had a place here. The sense of defeat was overwhelming. Yet, he couldn't accept the reality. As Steve stepped out of the door, the bell rang again, carrying a heavy but also a beginning of a new chapter for the store. Joe watched him leave, more determined than ever to make things better. Change wouldn't be easy, but he knew it was necessary for the brand's future. Joe looked around, seeing all the staff still standing quietly, their eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Everyone," he said, his voice firm yet passionate, "please turn your attention to the projector screen." Everyone turned around, their faces illuminated by the light from the screen. Displayed on the screen was a vibrant chart with the core values of the company: respect, quality, innovation, and transparency. This is the creed we strive for, Joe said, his eyes lighting up as he looked at each word on the screen. We're not just selling products, we're building a community where every customer and every employee feels welcomed and respected. This isn't just theory, it's how we operate on a daily basis. Joe emphasized each word, inspiring everyone present. We need to work by these values. Every employee here plays a crucial role in creating an experience for our customers, and that starts with us respecting them, no matter who they are. We need an environment where everyone feels safe to express themselves and contribute. This is the foundation for growth and innovation. On the screen, a slogan stood out: "Difference creates value." Joe continued, "Each of us is different, and that is our strength. We will not only work for profit, but also for our passion and dedication to our customers." All eyes followed Joe, and a sense of excitement began to spread. He could feel a shift in the atmosphere, as if everyone was ready for a new beginning. "Starting today, we will together uphold these commitments," Joe concluded, his gaze filled with determination. "And I believe that with everyone's support and effort, we will create an environment that not only serves our customers best, but also is a place where every employee is proud to work." After igniting everyone's spirits, it was time to make real changes. He knew that strong and appropriate leadership was essential to guide the store forward. "I want to announce an important decision," Joe said, his eyes bright with hope. He looked around, seeing the anticipation in the eyes of each employee. "Annie, please step up here." Annie was surprised, her heart pounding. She walked forward tentatively but confidently. All eyes in the room turned to her, and she felt the focus of everyone's attention. Joe smiled warmly, encouragingly. "I am pleased to announce that Annie will be appointed as the acting manager." Applause broke out, mixed with cheers and congratulations from colleagues. Annie looked around, overwhelmed, but filled with immense pride. She could hardly believe that her hard work and dedication had been recognized in this way. "Annie has always shown professionalism and a strong commitment to the store," Joe continued, his voice confident. "She understands the core values we strive for, and I believe she will lead the team in the right direction." "Thank you, everyone," Annie said, her voice soft yet full of resolve. "I am very grateful for this trust, and I will do my utmost not to disappoint everyone. I want to help build a work environment that we can all be proud of." Joe nodded, satisfied with his choice. "I will arrange for someone to assist Annie in this role. We need to ensure that everyone gets the support they need to succeed. This is not just about one individual, but about the development of our entire team." "Thank you all for taking the time," Joe concluded the meeting. His gaze swept across each employee, sensing their enthusiasm and determination in the air. "I trust each one of you, and I believe we can make this store a model for the values our brand stands for. Let's do it together." The room erupted in applause. Joe knew this was not just a meeting, but a beginning of a new journey, where every employee is encouraged to maximize their potential. Everyone was ready to contribute, and Joe felt a clear sense of positive change approaching. Annie turned back, her eyes shining with pride. "Thank you for trusting me, Joe. I won't let you down," she said, determination clear in her voice. "I know we will make it together," Joe responded with a smile on his face. In a short time, the store began to show signs of change. The atmosphere became lighter, and the bond among the employees more apparent. Smiles on everyone's faces reflected a positive work spirit. Joe's decision to appoint Annie as the interim manager had proven right, as she worked tirelessly to create a warm and respectful work environment. One beautiful morning, Joe decided to make a surprise visit to the store to see how things were progressing. The sunlight filtered through the trees, creating a warm atmosphere. As he entered the store, the door chime rang, announcing his presence. Joe looked around and noticed that the atmosphere in the store had significantly improved. The employees were happily engaging with each customer with bright smiles. This made him feel pleased about the changes that had taken place. Approaching the checkout counter, Joe saw James, the manager he had appointed to assist Annie, busy checking the merchandise. "Hello, James," Joe greeted with a beaming smile. "Good to see you again." "You seem busy," Joe observed, looking at the stack of goods James was arranging. "How have things progressed since Annie started as the acting manager?" "We've made very positive progress," James replied. Annie has implemented some great changes, and everyone feels more excited about working. The customers also have very positive feedback. Joe looked around the store. That's wonderful. You've done a great job supporting Annie. I believe that with both of your efforts combined, the store will grow even stronger. Thank you, James said, his smile unwavering. We are all very determined to build an environment where customers feel welcomed and employees are proud to work. Their conversation was interrupted by the chime of the door. Joe turned and saw Steve standing at the entrance. Steve's demeanor lacked its usual confidence. His face clearly displayed anxiety and restlessness. His eyes scanned the store and then settled on Joe. Joe's expression stiffened slightly. He did not anticipate encountering Steve here again, especially after their recent tense meeting. Steve approached, each step slower than usual, displaying his lack of confidence. "Joe," Steve began, his voice almost pleading, "I need to talk to you. Please give me a moment of your time." Joe's expression remained unchanged. He glanced at James, who looked surprised but remained silent, then turned back to Steve. "All right, Steve, I have a moment. What do you want to talk about?" Steve took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice choking up. "I've realized that I was wrong. I've had time to reflect on my behavior, and I understand that I made a serious mistake. I judged people unfairly. I let my prejudices interfere with my work. I'm truly sorry, Joe." Joe listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. Steve's eyes were pleading, his voice heavy with desperation. "I've been with the company for many years," Steve continued. "I care deeply about the brand and the store. Please give me another chance to prove that I can change, that I can manage the store the way you want. I'll do anything." Joe remained silent for a moment, letting Steve's words hang in the air. He remembered the times Steve had refused service to customers based on their appearance, how he had treated Joe himself. Steve's sudden change seemed more driven by desperation than genuine remorse. "I appreciate your apology," Joe finally spoke, his tone calm but firm. "But this wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern of behavior, an attitude that has been present for years. What I've seen in the store isn't just an error, but a consequence of a deeply ingrained mindset that doesn't align with our values." Steve's face fell, his eyes filled with despair. "Joe, please," he begged. "I can learn and change. Just give me the store back, and I will prove it to you." Joe slowly shook his head. "The decision has been made, Steve. The store is thriving under Annie's leadership, and the staff has responded very positively to the changes. I can't revert to the old ways. My responsibility is to the company and to every customer who walks into this store. Allowing you back would undermine everything we've achieved." Steve's shoulders sagged, his last hope dissipating. He looked at Joe, his despair turning to acceptance. "I understand," he said softly, as if talking to himself. Joe's voice softened slightly. "Steve, I hope you take this as an opportunity to reflect and grow. This isn't about punishment, but about ensuring that the right people hold key positions to uphold the brand's values. I wish you all the best in the future, but you will not be returning to this store." Steve nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Thank you for your time," he whispered, then turned and walked out of the store, each step heavy with resignation. As the door chime rang, it sounded like a cold farewell. Joe stood still, watching Steve leave, feeling a twinge of sympathy. But Steve's apology had come too late. Joe couldn't risk the integrity of the brand for a second chance. His responsibility was to the company, the employees, and the customers. "This change is necessary. It will help us build a better working environment," James said. Joe glanced around the store, noticing the improved atmosphere. Employees were engaging with customers warmly, and there was a renewed sense of enthusiasm and motivation throughout the store. "We've come a long way," Joe said, a smile spreading across his face, "and I believe the best is yet to come." And with that, Joe left the store, his heart full of hope for the future. The journey they had embarked on was only the beginning, but he knew that, together, they would overcome any challenges and build a better working environment and customer experience for everyone. This story concludes here. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on the heartfelt stories I'm dedicated to bringing to you. Your support is a precious motivation for me to continue this journey, and I am truly grateful to have you as part of it.